In today's video, we will be taking a look at my updated 2024 Senate election prediction as of today, June 20th of 2024. First off, an overview. Democrats currently are at 51 Senate seats to Republicans at 49. 51 seats are needed to control the majority. However, Republicans have several fundamental advantages that may help them win back the Senate in 2024. First off, the map. Republicans are only defending 11 seats, while Democrats are defending 23 seats of the 34 seats that are up for grabs in 2024. In other words, Democrats are defending more than twice the number of seats as the Republican Party. And Trump won 3 of those seats by more than 8 points in both 2016 and 2020, the states of Ohio, West Virginia, and Montana, while Trump also won 4 other Democratic seats in 2016 that Democrats have to defend in the 2024 Senate elections, being Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and the state of Arizona. Furthermore, Biden's current approval rating is quite lackluster. Biden's approval has been stuck below 40% since March of this year, and the generic ballot also looks concerning for the Democratic Party, with Democrats maintaining just a 0.2% lead over the Republican Party. If Democrats want to control the Senate, they probably need at least a +5 on the generic ballot. Nevertheless, here, Republicans have one major flaw. The quality of their candidates are a bit concerning for the Republican Party. But ultimately, who will win this 2024 Senate prediction, we'll have to wait and see when I fill in the map. Now, I will be filling in this map geographically, starting with the West Coast, or the state of Washington, where Democrat Maria Cantwell will face a Republican challenger this fall. However, Washington has not went for a Republican in decades, and therefore I will characterize this race as safely in the Democratic column. Next, in the state of California, where longtime serving Senator Dianne Feinstein passed away back in 2023. Governor Gavin Newsom appointed only the third black individual to serve on the Senate, LaFonia Butler. However, she decided that she would not end up seeking re-election in this seat, and as a result, Democrat Adam Schiff will face Republican Steve Garvey in this race for California. However, Democrats combined for more than a 20% advantage in the state in terms of the open primary, in terms of the vote share, while Democrats have won the state for the past several decades, and Joe Biden won the state by 30 points or 5 million votes. Therefore, I'm going to be giving this state away for Democrats by a safe margin. Now going to the first competitive race in the state of Montana, where Democrat Jon Tester is once again in a fight for his life after he won 3 extremely contested elections back in 2006, 2012, and 2018 in this exact Senate race. This time around, he will have probably the toughest election against Republican Tim Sherry. Sherry isn't the worst candidate or really the best candidate either, but at least he's kind of a fine candidate. And the fact is, Tester is in a lot of trouble because Biden lost the state to Trump by 16.4%, and of course there will be split ticket voting, but in the polarized environment we currently live in, and the fact that no states split their ballot back in 2016 in terms of the presidential and the Senate, and only one state split its ballot back in 2020 in the state of Maine, where Susan Collins, the Republican, won re-election, while Joe Biden, the Democrat, won his election in the state of Maine, obviously. Split ticket voting has become extremely uncommon, and Tester, although he's known to be a more moderate person, he really isn't. His voting record is still 90-something% in favor of the Democratic Party, and that will be a problem for him to run for re-election because Susan Collins' voting record is much more moderate, and generally he is in a much more conservative state than Susan Collins in a liberal state. So I do have this race right now going to the Republican Tim Sherry by a lead margin because how polarized the current national environment really is. Going to the next state here, the state of Nevada, where Republican Sam Brown will be facing Democrat Jackie Rosen. Jackie Rosen is more establishment in terms of the Democratic ideology, and she defeated Dean Heller back in 2018 by a margin of about 5%. Pretty impressive considering Dean Heller was the incumbent at the time. However, she certainly has some troubles because Biden is polling about 5 points behind Donald Trump in the state of Nevada. However, Jackie Rosen so consistently maintains a lead over her Republican challenger, Sam Brown. Sam Brown is also kind of a mediocre candidate. Jackie Rosen, she's not very well known for a senator from a competitive state. However, she is moderately popular in her home state. This race will be very close. I think that Jackie Rosen will certainly overrun Donald Trump, will certainly overrun Joe Biden, who I expect will lose the state. I think Trump will probably win the state on a presidential level, and considering split ticket voting is quite rare now, it's not a good thing that, again, Trump will win the state for Jackie Rosen. However, I do believe that Jackie Rosen will narrowly win re-election just because she is a relatively decent and popular incumbent, and Sam Brown has nothing in particular that would substantially resonate with voters. Now we go to the next nearby state, the state of Utah, where Mitt Romney is retiring. The Republican primary right now has 4 candidates who all have some shot of winning this race. However, really 2 candidates have the best shot, but either way, this will be a safe Republican state, no doubt about that. Now going to the next state here, another critical battleground state, the state of Arizona, where Republican Kari Lake will face Democrat Ruben Gallego this November. Now, Ruben Gallego is a sitting congressman from the state, and Kari Lake is pretty much a Trump favorite for the state of Arizona. If you look at the 2020 presidential election results in the state, this was the tightest state by the total popular vote, where Joe Biden won the state by less than 11,000 votes over Donald Trump. And I do expect Trump to win the state in the 2024 presidential election. However, Kari Lake has a fundamental problem: her electability. Back in 2024, under the governor's race, Kari Lake faced a pretty much lackluster Democrat, Katie Hobbs, who had the reputation of essentially sitting in her basement and not campaigning at all, not doing anything. People expected Kari Lake to win by about 3 to 5 points, and that was what polling predicted. And then Katie Hobbs ended up winning this race. Why? Because Kari Lake's rhetoric of the 2020 presidential election being stolen, and pretty much never acknowledging that she lost her own race in the governor's elections, really tainted her reputation and ended up costing her this race in the state of Arizona. And Ruben Gallego is a sitting congressman. Now, he is more progressive, and Arizona voters generally do not like progressives because there's a lot of moderates in the state. But nevertheless, just based on the fact that Kari Lake is such a poor candidate, I would think that Kari Lake is probably going to lose to Ruben Gallego in general, because again, she lost to Katie Hobbs, so it doesn't really make sense that in my opinion, that she defeats Ruben Gallego. Now going to the state of Hawaii, where the incumbent Democratic Senator Mazie Hirono won more than 70% of the vote in that state back in 2018. She is a very strong incumbent in that race, and therefore it will be a safe Democratic state right now. Now going to the next state here, the state of New Mexico, Martin Hendrick is a very popular Democrat in his home state. He got about 55% of the vote in 2018, despite the fact that he faced actually 2 opponents, Mark Rich, the Republican, and also Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, former governor, and who ran in 2016 for the presidential election against Donald Trump and also Hillary Clinton. Gary Johnson got more than 100,000 votes. Despite that, Martin Hendrick still easily cleared the majority, and if you even combine the Republican and Libertarian vote, Hendrick was still won by more than 8%. Now, he ended up winning, actually, if you just ignore the Libertarian candidate, by 23.6%. I easily expect him to win. This time, I'll move it to the safe Democratic characterization. Now going to the state of Wyoming, where John Barrasso, the Republican, will win in this safely Republican state. We go to the state of North Dakota, where Kevin Cramer, who defeated the Democratic incumbent in that race, Heidi Heitkamp, in 2018 by more than a 10% margin, a double-digit margin, he'll easily cruise to re-election in 2024. In the state of Nebraska, there are 2 Senate races between first, the general election between Deb Fischer and a Democratic candidate. Deb Fischer is going to win. And in the special election, Pete Ricketts, who was appointed and won the Republican primary, will easily cruise to re-election. Now, the state of Texas, where Republican incumbent Ted Cruz will face Democrat Colin Allred, a representative from the state of Texas. Now, in 2018, there was an extremely competitive race in this same exact Senate race between Republican Ted Cruz and Democrat Beto O'Rourke, where Ted Cruz won by less than 3 percentage points. However, this time around, Democrats will probably not have the same luck. This is because Beto O'Rourke at the time was a once-in-a-generation candidate, and this was a blue wave election. Furthermore, Beto O'Rourke did very well in the suburbs, while simultaneously performing pretty well with the Hispanic belt of the state, which is essentially the Rio Grande Valley. This time around, Democrats have lost significant support in the Rio Grande Valley, and Joe Biden's going to do pretty poorly in the state compared to 2020, or especially considering what happened to Beto O'Rourke back in 2018. Democrats will just not get that level of support, and now Republicans will win the state of Texas by probably around 8 to 10 points, or sufficient for a likely margin. This brings the Republicans to 45 seats, and Democrats at just 34 seats. The next state here, the state of Mississippi, with Roger Wicker probably going to win that state by a safe margin. Going to the next state here, the state of Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn, who defeated Phil Bredesen at the time in a relatively competitive race. Blackburn will easily cruise to re-election, this time not facing as popular of a Democratic candidate as she did back in 2018. Going to Missouri here with Josh Hawley. Josh Hawley will end up winning re-election, no doubt about that. He defeated Claire McCaskill, the incumbent Democrat from that race back in 2018. These will all be safe Republican states because these are safe Republican states on the presidential level, and no notable Democrat has been able to challenge any of these candidates. Going to Indiana here, incumbent U.S. Senator Mike Braun, he is retiring to run for governor, and another Republican will end up replacing him for the general election. The Republican Party obviously has a significant advantage in Indiana, and therefore they will win that race by a safe margin, elevating them to 49 Senate races to Democrats at 34. Next up, the state of Florida, where Republican incumbent Rick Scott, who defeated Bill Nelson back in 2018 by a margin of just 0.15%, is expected to win re-election against the Democratic challenger just because of how red the state is now, and the fact that he defeated a relatively decent Democratic nominee who was also the incumbent at the time, Bill Nelson, suggests that he'll probably defeat a no-name Democratic challenger, especially considering Trump is also expected to win the race in the state of Florida by at least 5 points and perhaps ranging to upwards into the double digits. Now going to the state of Minnesota here, where Amy Klobuchar is going to win re-election against the Republican challenger. Klobuchar is extremely popular, won the state back in 2018 by a margin of about 24%, a really strong margin, more than 600,000 votes in her Senate race, while in the same ballot, Tina Smith only won by about half of that margin. In fact, a bit less than half of the Amy Klobuchar margin in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota is between likely and safe blue. Now going to the state of Maryland here, Tim Kaine will probably have no real challenge against Republican Hung Kao in this race. Hung Kao is ran for House back in 2022 against Democrat Jennifer Wexton. Kao overperformed by about 10%, but did end up coming up short. Again, Tim Kaine, pretty popular Democratic incumbent, probably going to win re-election here by between a likely and safe margin. Now going to the state of Maryland, where there is a surprisingly competitive race between Republican Larry Hogan and Democrat Angela Alsobrooks. I made a video about that. You can click the card up top after you finished watching this video. Anyways, the state of Maryland here is surprisingly competitive because if you look at the governor race results back in 2018 in the state of Maryland, despite the fact that there was a significant, blue wave across the board, Larry Hogan, the incumbent Republican governor, still won the state by about 12% over Democrat Ben Jealous in this race. Now, the state is heavily Democratic on the presidential level. Joe Biden won the state by more than a 2-1 margin. However, again, popular governors do end up doing much better than what the generic presidential election ends up saying. However, there is a bad precedent for Larry Hogan to follow. The fact is, typically popular incumbents, governors do not end up winning Senate races after they have retired. For example, back in 2020, Steve Bullock, the Democrat in that race, was expected to make the Montana Senate race back in 2020 to be within 1 percentage point, according to the polling, according to many political pundits, and he lost as a popular Democratic governor from the state by about 10%, which tracked only 5% below the margin that Trump won the state against Biden back in 2020. Another good example in 2018 was the Senate race between Marsha Blackburn and Phil Bredesen. Phil Bredesen was a very popular former governor of the state of Tennessee. When he ran for re-election, he actually got 68% of the vote in the safely Republican state of Tennessee. Yet against a non-incumbent, Marsha Blackburn still won by double digits. So Larry Hogan is not someone who is expected to end up winning his Senate race in the state of Maryland, considering the fact that already he is starting to pull behind the Democratic nominee, Angela Alsobrooks, who won an upset primary. I currently have the state of Maryland as a likely Democratic state. Now, it could easily go down to lean, but I really do have a hard time right now seeing Larry Hogan winning the state of Maryland at this moment in time. Going next to the state of Delaware here, Chris Carper, he is going to win re-election in the state of Delaware. No real question there. In the state of New Jersey, we have an interesting phenomenon where Democrat incumbent Senator Bob Menendez is not running for re-election after he was indicted on several felonies, and if convicted and sentenced to a maximum sentence, he could face the rest of his life behind bars. That left Andy Kim, the Democrat there, who won the Democratic primary in that race by a dominating margin, expected to win continue the win streak for Democrats in the state of New Jersey and win that Senate race. However, because of the legacy that Bob Menendez has left him, I think the margin will be slightly more competitive at a likely margin rather than a safe margin. Now going to the next state here, the state of Connecticut. If you look at the state of Connecticut, also very similar story here. Chris Murphy is going to win re-election, no doubt about that. Well, if you go to the state of New York here, 2022 proved the state to be more competitive than what people may have expected. For example, in 2022, Governor Kathy Hochul won against Lee Zeldin by just 6%. That is a very concerning margin for a Democrat in the state of New York, and that is why several House seats in the state flipped to the Republican Party. However, the incumbent Democrat, Christine Gillibrand, very popular, someone who won her 2018 bid by more than a 2-to-1 margin against the Republican candidate, expected to cruise to re-election in that race. So I'm still going to put this in the safe Democratic column, but in no way is she going to win by a 34% margin. Now going to the state of Rhode Island, Sheldon Whitehouse expected to win re-election there. Won the state of Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, who ran for president and did decently in the total popular national vote there. For the Democratic primary, is expected to win re-election. Well, there are 2 independent senators up for re-election in this election as well. Vermont will go to Bernie Sanders, no doubt about that. Well, the state of Maine will go for Angus King. He will face both a Democrat and a Republican, but he is heavily favored to win re-election as the independent former governor of the state of Maine and the now independent senator from the state of Maine. That leaves 5 really competitive races, all in the Rust Belt. I'm going to first off fill in the state of West Virginia, where Democratic incumbent Joe Manchin III is not going to run for re-election because he essentially believes that he could not win re-election against Republican Jim Justice, a former Democratic governor and now Republican governor, and also nominee for United States Senate in the state of West Virginia. Although initially Manchin was polling significantly ahead of the Republican Party, when Jim Justice announced his bid, Joe Manchin was essentially polling double digits behind Jim Justice. Rather than losing his Senate seat, he decided to just not run instead and he has recently switched to an independent, fueling speculation he might actually run for it as an independent. I don't think it matters. I believe that Jim Justice will win the state by a safe margin against Glenn Elliott, the Democratic nominee, even if somehow Joe Manchin decides to run this time as an independent and Glenn Elliott drops out. I still believe that the state will go to the Republican Party, though maybe by a likely margin, not a safe margin. Nevertheless, here I just don't see Joe Manchin or Glenn Elliott defeating Jim Justice in this race. Right now, I just think that Joe Manchin will not end up trying to somehow squeeze in a run, and as a result, the state of West Virginia is safe in the Republican category. Not surprising considering Democrats did not even win a single county in the state of West Virginia back in 2020. Now going to the next race here, which will be the state of Wisconsin, where Tammy Baldwin is facing generally a bit of a stronger candidate in the state of Wisconsin. However, again, I just don't see a Republican being able to win that state because of the fact, although Biden is pulling a bit behind Donald Trump in that race, and I also expect Biden to lose the state of Wisconsin. Again, right, these popular Democratic incumbent senators from the Rust Belt. Generally, if your candidate is not Donald Trump and you're in one of the Rust Belt states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, you're fine, right? All three of those states currently, except the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a Republican senator, Ron Johnson, but Michigan and Pennsylvania both have two Democratic senators, and generally they are more keen on electing Democrats than Republicans. Tammy Baldwin also won by a double-digit margin, so I don't think that a Republican will be able to successfully oppose and challenge her. I think the race will be more competitive at about a 3 to 4 point margin for the Democratic incumbent, but still, I'm going to put this in the lean Democratic category at this moment in time. Now going to the state of Michigan, where the incumbent senator from that state, Debbie Stabenow, is not running for re-election. The state of Michigan was decided by 6.5% against Republican John James, who later in 2022 ended up winning a Macomb County-based district in the House of Representatives. Debbie Stabenow, again, she's retiring, so she's pretty much out of the picture. I think Democrats will generally just win the state just because of the fact that, again, these three Rust Belt states, they generally have a Democratic heritage. Many of these voters, they might even support Trump, but they end up backing a Democrat. And also, the fact is, Republicans have not found a really strong candidate to oppose the Democratic nominee, whoever that may be, in the Michigan Senate race. And as a result, I do believe that the Republican Party will lose the state by a lean margin on the same ballot that they perhaps win the state of Michigan on the presidential level. Now going to the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has an extremely strong Democratic incumbent senator, Bob Casey, who defeated Lou Barletta by about a 13% margin back in 2018. Essentially, the Republican Party and Lou Barletta decided to just give up in the race, knowing that they could not win. On the same ballot, Tom Wolf won the governor's race here by a similarly astounding 15% margin, which is really, really impressive. Now, Democrats, this might actually end up pulling Joe Biden ahead of Donald Trump on the presidential level, but anyways, that I am running a bit ahead of myself. So Bob Casey is a generally an institution in the state. He will face Republican Dave McCormick, who ran in 2022 unsuccessfully in the Republican primary. Dr. Oz beat him in the Republican primary by a fraction of 0.1%, just for Mehmet Oz to end up losing the general election. So Bob Casey is a strong candidate, Dave McCormick more moderate, someone who could appeal to those moderate voters in the Philly suburbs. But again, I think Republican turnout in the rural areas will be slightly lower for Dave McCormick, just like how Pat Toomey was able to win re-election back in 2016. He did very well in the suburbs. He even won Chester County, a county that Democrats now win by double digits, but he also performed poorly in the rural areas compared to Donald Trump. So this election will be quite interesting. It will ultimately be determined by a couple things: how well are Democrats able to do in the Philly suburbs. For example, in Chester County, Joe Biden won the county by 17. Well, historically, just about 2 decades ago, this was a Republican county, right? In this type of area, if Dave McCormick is able to perform surprisingly well, he could end up winning the state. But right now, I heavily doubt it. I have this race going on about a lean margin for the Democrat, Bob Casey, but I would not be surprised if he ended up winning re-election by a likely margin, because again, he is essentially an institution in the state. Finally, in the state of Ohio, between incumbent Democrat Sherrod Brown and Republican Bernie Moreno, another extremely vulnerable Democrat, Sherrod Brown is, alongside Democrat Jon Tester in the state of Montana. Now, many people have criticized Bernie Moreno, saying he is a weak Republican candidate. The problem is that, again, this is a more Republican state, and generally Trump won the state by 8% in both 2016 and 2020, and the state is trending towards the Republican Party. Furthermore, you can argue the weak candidate argument, but the problem is, again, J.D. Vance, people said, was an extremely weak candidate against Tim Ryan, a more popular Democrat in general. However, Tim Ryan did not even win a county like Mahoning County, which is a more working class county, a county that you'd expect a Democrat to win if they were more, moderate, more working class. Tim Ryan was said to be like essentially the perfect candidate for the Democratic side, while J.D. Vance was essentially a lackluster candidate according to Democrats, and still J.D. Vance won by a likely margin. So that is definitely not a good look for the Democratic Party. Furthermore, in the Democratic primary here, you can see that Sherrod Brown, the incumbent, only got 529,000 votes in his primary, while Bernie Moreno, despite only getting about 50% of the vote, actually garnered more votes than Sherrod Brown, the incumbent Democrat. Again, that is not a good sign if you are a Republican Democrat desperate for higher turnout. Now, this primary difference I would attribute to two things. Number one, the fact that the Republican primary was more competitive. And number two, the fact that many Democrats were actually voting for Bernie Moreno because they felt like that Sherrod Brown had a better chance to beat him than Matt Dolan or Frank LaRose. But either way, again, these numbers, although they're not very definitive, and I wouldn't put much money onto these numbers, I would have to say that right now it just doesn't look good for Sherrod Brown. Back in 2018, again, people thought that he would have an easy cruise to re-election. B. Renacci, who ended up challenging Governor Mike DeWine and lost the primary there back in 2022. Again, right? Pretty much James B. Renacci just gave up after seeing some polls having him down 15 points against Sherrod Brown, thinking he had no chance of winning. And sure, he didn't do great, but it was about a 7% margin, where Republicans essentially funded pretty much no money into this race, thinking they could not win, and instead focused on races like Indiana or Missouri, right? If you look at the state of Ohio here, it's not even on the list of key states. This was not expected to be that competitive. Well, if you look at the state like Mississippi or a state like Tennessee was quote unquote in a toss-up category, and Marsha Blackburn won that race by a 10% margin. While if you look at Ohio, it was safely in the Democratic margin, at least according to New York Times, and Sherrod Brown only won the race by less than 7% against a candidate who was at the time A, no name, and two, without money, and C, essentially did not campaign at all. So in the end of the day, I believe that although Republicans did not have the best candidate, that the state of Ohio will go red just because it is a presidential election year. Biden is not very popular. And also the fact that, again, split ticket voting is so rare. Right now I have Ohio in the lean Republican category, which means I believe that Bernie Moreno will win by about 2 to 3%. So that is my final Senate prediction at this moment in time. Democrats at 48, Republicans at 52. No change from my last prediction. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.